Welcome to this presentation on the College Financial Handbook. My name is Chris Patterson. I work in the Financial Frameworks team, which is part of the ESFA's Finance and Provider Market Oversight Directorate. Our team has been responsible for developing the handbook with assistance from colleagues in the agency and across the wider Department for Education and beyond. I should also mention the input we've had from representatives from across the college sector, without whose help we could never have got to this point. In this session, I will cover, firstly, an overview of the steps we have taken to get to this point and what needs to happen next. That will include a few details on sector engagement. Secondly, we will look at the rationale and aims of the handbook, including why we have introduced the handbook and why we've used the format and the language that we've used. Thirdly, we will cover the broad content of the handbook, including a breakdown of the different sections and the various financial management and governance arrangements detailed within it. We will then have a look at what comes next in terms of when the handbook becomes effective and what colleges can do before and after that point. So how did we get to this point? Well, we have been working on contingency planning for potential college sector reclassification since 2021. But the work really began in earnest in spring 2022, when it became clear that a decision on sector classification by the Office for National Statistics would be made later in 2022. The first phase involved discussions with His Majesty's Treasury over the specifics of the financial delegations and thresholds for the sector. That culminated in some high-level messages in a Dear Accounting Officer letter, which was sent to college leaders on the day of reclassification itself, 29th of November 2022. And we later fleshed out these messages in a series of thematic bite-sized guides, which we issued in early 2023. But we knew we were always going to need something a little less ephemeral, and as soon as the bite-sized guides came out, we commenced the drafting of the handbook and our engagement with the sector on the text. We formed a working group that met 3 times, and we took successive iterations of the draft handbook through that working group until we had consensus. We finalised sector engagement on the text in early autumn 2023. It was then a case of us getting sign-off from key stakeholders such as the Treasury and the Charity Commission, as well as further input from various other policy teams across DFE and the wider DFE family. Finally, we needed ministerial sign-off, which we obtained in January 2024. The handbook is being published on Gov.uk on the 20th of March 2024. We will also issue a Dear Accounting Officer letter to college leaders at the same time. The handbook will become effective from the 1st of August 2024. At that point, it will link to the College Accountability Agreement and the Oversight, Support and Intervention Framework for academic year 2024-25. So you do have a few months to consider and, if necessary, update your own policies and procedures to accommodate the handbook requirements. So you may be asking yourself, why a handbook at all? Well, we've put together a handbook in the way that we have to help give colleges certainty and support with their financial management and governance, and to provide additional assurance to our accounting officer that the public funds are being protected and used effectively. The framework we have put together gives clarity on when there is an expectation to have a particular process or arrangement in place, or alternatively, we recommend something as good practice. The handbook also aims to support the sector by showing what good practice looks like, so colleges can make informed choices, even if a particular element might not be actually mandatory. Also, the handbook should support ESFA's duty to fully assure Parliament and the taxpayer regarding the funds that we issue to colleges. The handbook is an additional lever which will enable us to do this by setting out the parameters that create a robust fiscal environment and involving clear messages about do's and don'ts. We've worked in partnership with the sector to ensure the handbook is supportive. Part of this has involved us recognising the full diversity of the sector and preserving colleges' autonomy and local discretion. That is why many of the key financial and governance control requirements are presented as principles rather than rigid rules. So, as you can see from this slide, we have reached out across the sector to ensure that the widest possible range of views has been taken into account. So, what did the sector tell us? To some extent, the handbook reflects what the sector tells us that it needs. Sector representatives were aware of the existence of the Academy Trust Handbook, and while its merits were noted, they were at pains to remind us that we could not just do a simple drag and drop of the Academy Trust Handbook into the college space. That said, we should acknowledge that there are similarities with the framework for academies, because the basics of good management are of probably universal application. But we have, of course, reflected the particular nature of colleges. Sector representatives understood the importance of us being clear with them about what the requirements were, but they wanted us to leave it to colleges to get on with things in ways that were specific to each college. They wanted us to use the handbook as a medium for sharing best practice, but being clear which elements were mandatory and which were optional. They understood that it would be impractical to set out a definitive list of things that they were not allowed to do, appreciating that such a list can never be immutable, and so would run the risk of giving the impression that anything not specifically forbidden must be okay. They were relaxed about stating the obvious. They understood that part of the readership could include people which were new in role or even new to the sector. So, we have reasonable grounds for thinking that, maybe with the exception of some of the new rules and financial thresholds and delegations, most of what is there is what you would already expect to see in any well-run college. Much of the framework has been around for years anyway, and I'm thinking here particularly perhaps of the public sector procurement rules or the application of charity law and regulation. But the sector has told us that they do think it useful to bring it all together into one place. But as I've already mentioned, the handbook is also about ESFA being able to obtain assurance over the proper use of funds. So as well as the input of sector representatives, we've also need to get the buy-in of other bodies, such as those I've already mentioned, the Treasury and Charity Commission, but as well as our own accounting officer and of course our ministers. So that's enough scene setting. What about the handbook itself? The handbook begins with some introductory words from the Minister for Skills, Robert Halfon, and a foreword from the ESFA Chief Executive, David Withey. Both explain how the handbook aims to support the great work colleges do already by providing additional structure and ideas for strong financial management and governance. We then get to the formal introduction, which deals with matters of scope, terminology, language, and so on. There then follow 6 main sections of the handbook. Part 1 sets out some information on roles and responsibilities in the college. The focus is very much on the position of the accounting officer. Strictly speaking, this is a pre-existing element of the framework, but we are very much putting the responsibilities of the accounting officer in the shop window. Part 2 sets out expectations in relation to financial control and oversight. And we place an emphasis on the responsibilities of the board. This includes a messaging on having a proper approach to procurement, including subcontracting, and how to avoid or manage conflicts of interest. Again, there may be nothing specifically new here, but putting it all together in one place does give it a certain profile. Part 3 is quite short and again sets out some pre-existing material concerning the role of the audit committee and how internal review might work. You may note here that we say internal review rather than internal audit. But despite the sector having been reclassified, That has not resulted in internal audit being made mandatory. But clearly, the discharging of these requirements is going to be that much more practical with internal audit in place. Part 4 is also pretty succinct, and it's all about the accounts and external audit. I think if I was to pick out any section here as having a bit of an impact, it would probably be the emphasis that we place on the accounting officer's responsibilities for regularity, propriety, and compliance. So another mention of the accounting officer, and so you may notice a little bit of a theme emerging. Part 5 is what I'm referring to as the main event. It's here that we capture all of the specific rules on thresholds, permissions, and so on that we first set out in the bite-sized guides. So for instance, it's here that we set out the borrowing rules, the rules on special payments, novel contentious and repercussive payments, losses, write-offs, indemnities, guarantees, letters of comfort, and so on. But do remember, colleges have been following these rules since November 2022, so none of this should come as a shock. Part 6 provides a reminder of the existing oversight and intervention methods used by ESFA, DFE and others to ensure that colleges are operating appropriately and effectively as per the terms of their accountability agreements. I think it's probably worth having a think about expectations, with a focus not just on what the handbook is, but also what it is not. If I've not already said this, I will say it now. The handbook is all about principles rather than detail. In the main, it sets out the what, not the how. Will it answer every question? Maybe not. But we think it does offer a framework for colleges to work out the answer. And we recognise the track record of college leaders in terms of doing the right things, drawing on the advice from their governance professional, commercial and procurement teams, legal advisors, and so on. College leaders need to be in a position where they can make the right call rather than checking in with us on matters where, in reality, the principles are pretty clear. The handbook is not massively long and the language is not legalistic. It should, I think, be seen as a codification of the existing financial and governance framework rather than introducing lots of new requirements. Nor is it primarily about intervention or the consequences of non-compliance. Those are matters which are largely dealt with elsewhere. So what next? Well, while we are publishing this handbook now, it is not effective until the 1st of August. So colleges do have an opportunity to digest the content and work out what is applicable to them and adapt accordingly where required. The release of the handbook as a supportive set of requirements and best practice for colleges will be reflected in accountability agreements and in the oversight, support and intervention framework with effect from 1st of August 2024. Most importantly, we want to continue to work in partnership with the sector and further develop and enhance the handbook as required over time, and we want colleges to provide feedback on it. Thank you for listening to this presentation. We hope that the handbook will be a useful tool to support you.